This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Satisfy your iced coffee craving without leaving home with custom blends. From double espressos to cold brew style. Meant to be iced, meant to be simple, and consistently delicious with a touch of a button. Visit Nespresso.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Flash Finds Podcast, the world's fastest podcast where we explore how Facebook can help you with the stuff you're into. I'm Emma Rogue, joined by Nathan the Cat Lady, a Facebook creator. So Nathan, if you're into pets, what kind of stuff can you find on Facebook?
Well, I make reels about useful tips for pet owners. For instance, cats don't like still water, so all of my cats have cat fountains.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute. What a great episode. See you next time on the Flash Finds Podcast, all about discovering the stuff on Facebook you care about. Bye.
Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in, boys and girls. We're back, Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined, as always, by Matthew, published author Betz.
I do feel like I may have just, completed an Amazon bestseller. I'm not going to say that it will be that, but it's what it feels like. If this is what it feels like to be a published author that writes novels, writes books, I never want to do this again. Okay, because this article that I wrote took so much time and effort and research and all those things, and I loved it. It was a very fun process. I'm happy to talk through it today. I think it's going to be very good for everybody that's playing best ball and getting ready for season-long drafts and all that stuff. But oh my gosh, man, hat tip to all the writers out there, because Never again. Hat tip until next year. Hat tip to all the writers out there that actually are writing, real books, novels. I mean, I'm exhausted from just doing this one article. I can't imagine what it'd be like to write, a 300-page book or something like that. So hat tip to all of you out there. What
Betz is talking to, what I'm referring to, is an article that is out on the site that we're going to be talking through here. And the reason why is because if you just wanted to read it, if you're one of those people that you're literate and you went on our site, it would take you 57 minutes to read the thing. That's a lot of words, my friend. And so what we decided to do is give the best of the best. And what we're going to be talking about is, with training camp, what are the battles? What are the biggest questions? And then for this podcast specifically, we're going to talk about best ball and how that translates to, were you ahead of the market on certain players? Are you behind the 8 ball? Did you guess wrong on certain players? So, I've taken the L a couple of times on Antonio Gibson. I've cooled off. But at the time I said, oh, well, we'll see. I didn't see a contract extension, where now it's, okay, Gibson will get some play, but, it's Ramondre. Same thing now, like you are in July, you're making certain bets on rosters and who the wide receiver 1 is for the Bills, the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. It could be any of those order of guys that ends up like the most targets. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Curtis Samuel, and I would project him to have more targets this year than Keon Coleman.
Yeah, I think after doing this article and doing some of this research, I think I agree. Doesn't mean he's the best ball pick, right? Because
correct.
I mean, Curtis, there was times in his career where he could win downfield, but more recently, and especially with Joe Brady in Carolina, it was the, manufactured touches, get him involved as a ball carrier, that sort of thing. So, he could lead the team in targets, but Keon Coleman could have 11 touchdowns and get that red zone role in half PPR. That matters so much. So, it is a nuanced conversation. It's one of those articles that when I wrote it, I had a lot of takeaways from it. But the article and this conversation, I think, is meant to say, here's what I'm going to be looking for over the next 4 or so weeks as we start training camps and get into training camps, is let's get these answers, and then we can really make sure we have solidified takes for the last, 3-ish weeks of drafting season once we get to mid-August.
I do have a couple of fun little announcements here. I wanted to make sure that people know about next week's podcast, because it is going to be
a
doozy. What Betz and I decided to do is give you all the cheat codes. Everything that you could ever want. If you needed a manual to beat a game, you played Game Genie back in the day, you used that to beat the game. We've assembled the best of the best when it comes to best ball. And on this show next week, we will actually have a number of guests getting to share their ultimate cheat codes for best ball this year. We're compiling those people together. We have some audio files. We have some people that are ready just to be locked and loaded. And then Betz and I will say like, hey, I get it. Or that's a good cheat code. I haven't really done that at all. So you want to pump the people up because next week's going to be a very special episode.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that listen to our show, they may have heard of this other small project called the Fantasy Footballers that, it's brand new. Not a lot of people have heard of it. The main show, they do, of course, every year the Fantasy MVP episode, which is awesome, right? You get perspectives from different people that you don't listen to all the time. We like to, give people a platform to share their work of what they're doing. So it's a similar thing. Like these are the best ball minds in the space that we respect. We respect their work. And we wanted to bring them on our show, get some ideas from them, and maybe, like you said, open our eyes to say, we haven't been doing that, maybe we should, or just talk through it in more detail. So yeah, that's coming next week. Lots of guests on the show. Really, really good, insightful people that I think are great at what they do, and I'm excited to talk through it.
And then maybe a bigger announcement is that when this podcast is coming out, on Friday, July 13th, that will be exactly 55 days until week 1 when it starts on that Thursday.
We are so back, baby. I mean, come on. We're here. This is it. It's fantasy football season.
Yeah, I was posting in the Discord about that number and then posting about the DFS pass, getting some comments, some feedback of what people want to prepare. Because that's how we treat August on this podcast. It's like, okay, you've been doing best ball, stay with best ball, use all of our rankings, use the best ball primer. We're starting to turn the page in August where we look at strategy related DFS and we want to take it to the next level this year. And Betz and I want to make sure that we're giving you content that you think is helping you remind yourself like, oh, this is how this works. So I had someone ask me about my cash lineups, and I write a cash review article that's really helpful for me to remind myself like, oh, here's how I did. I did so much better in cash last year than I did in tournaments. Usually I've kind of been, like I've had my wins. Like I had a couple of big wins last year, but I was so consistent in cash last year. I went back and just realized like, wow, I was above the cash line in 13 of 17 weeks in the regular season. Like that's my highest I've ever been. Years past was a little bit worse, but like I just realized like, okay, this is my bread and butter. This is what you and I are really good at. Our best plays in the DFS pass. Like that, I think if I could boil down everything in the DFS pass, dfspass.com, it is the best plays article. And I think every single week you and I put a lot of effort into that. So 55 days, man, that's not much.
That is equally as exciting as it is terrifying, because right now I'm still in like, it's off-season mode. Like you were at a lake, Wednesday. You took off a day this week, which Kyle never takes off. So shout out to Kyle. The roles have been reversed, by the way, people. Kyle was outside. He looks very tan. He was in the sun. I imagine what you do down in Georgia is you sip sweet tea and, put your feet in the lake. Meanwhile, I was...
You just sip peaches. That's
exactly
all we do. Just drink peaches.
I was in my office for hours on end trying to write this article and get this done for our show. So it's funny to see the roles reversed. But yeah, man, it's coming fast. And I'm excited that we are just a couple months away from DFS season. So here we go.
Yeah, make sure you reach out on Discord. I just want to remind you, like, we're not going to be able to answer everything. We have some great people in there that are always talking best ball, but the DFS channel and the props channel are starting to heat up. So make sure you get a part of that. We're not even going to do a quick question because this article that you wrote is way too long. So we're just going to hop right into it.
Make it snappy.
Raise your hand for, audio podcast. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that drop before on the Fantasy Footballers, because I haven't ever.
You played it for me just before we started recording, and I was like, is this literally the first time I've ever heard this? And I think the answer is probably yes.
I like looking through our archives, and apparently back in 2018, in October, early October, this drop was made. It was put in our Dropbox, and I don't know if we ever used it, but I'm going to do a little research to figure it out. But we're not going to make it that snappy for you, but we are going to do a bunch of quick hitters where Betz and I go through the biggest questions, and we're going to break it down by a couple of different categories. So, for instance, we're going to start off talking about team level concerns and just some general questions about how teams function. And we're not going to spend that much time on some of these teams. Like, for instance, the Titans. The storyline that you came up is, can Brian Callahan install the Cincinnati offense? You and I have talked a ton about Will Levis. I posted a ton about Will Levis shotgun. And can it work? And for best ball, I think you and I would say, like, the price is great, so we're fine with it. Now, it's a different conversation. Redraft, I think in DFS, man, we're going to be talking Will Levis. Like,
oh, brother.
We're going to get weird.
There's going to be some weeks where you're like, okay, this is a great matchup. Levis is 5,300. Hopkins and Ridley are both in the 5K range. This is a value stack. You spin up for CMC. I mean, just replay that in about 3 months. That's probably going to happen, right? So yeah, that's the fun thing, right? Is you can be in on a team like that in DFS at the right price in best ball. We talked a lot with Mike this past week on the Dynasty show, so check that out, about the Titans and about Calvin Ridley and some of my concerns there. But yeah, you can check out the article for that. We've talked so much this year about the Titans. I don't think it would be a ton of help to talk about them again today. So we're going to save our time for other teams and other questions.
The problem with your analysis is that you missed out on the piece that you really needed, which is a 2,700 Chiga Conquo in a GPP.
Always what you need.
All right, so let's talk about a couple other teams. So my Falcons, the question that Betz and I were kind of wrestling through, because the expectations are this team is going to take the next step. They're right now odds-on favorite to win the division. Is do they have the personnel to run the Rams system? That's like when I was looking at this offense and we talked and joked a little bit about Darnell Mooney, it's like this guy's going to be an every down player for an offense that's going to be, top 5 maybe in pass attempts. At least that's what the Rams have kind of been. And, Kirk Cousins was second in the league last year in passing yards with 3 wide receivers on the field. So there is volume, but is the market overreacting in best ball on the Falcons? They're expensive this year. So what's your take so far?
Yeah, they are expensive. And, I don't know how many of our listeners are doing a ton of drafting like in the big board and stuff before the NFL draft, but before free agency, before Kirk Cousins signed, I was just hammering Drake London over and over again in the 3rd and 4th round because I was like, I think they're getting Kirk Cousins. So I was psyched about that. But then I just kept doing it. So I have a massive bag of Drake London in best ball. I'm half excited, but also after doing this research, I am starting to wonder, like, are we giving too much credit for the situation? Because there is, I think, more fragility than the market would assume, right? Drake London goes at the 1-2 turn. Kyle Pitts is usually around a 5th round pick. Of course, Bijan goes in round 1. He deserves that. But when you look at just kind of top down, like you said, they're probably going to live in 3 wide receiver sets. The issue for me in copying and pasting the Rams situation to this is the Rams had 2 dudes named Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp as their rock solid. These guys are seeing 50+% of the targets.
You don't think Darnell and Drake are the same?
I'm not sure. Well, Drake London, I think, has that upside. I'm not sure Darnell Mooney or Rondale Moore fit, and that's the concern for me when I dug into this research. Like, Darnell Mooney was a fun, like, little dynasty kind of sleeper guy in Chicago, 3 years ago? But his yards per route run have been 1.72, 1.58, 0.89 last year. And Rondale Moore, we know what he is, right, at this point. For reference of like where he was valued in the trade market for the NFL, Desmond Ridder was the key piece to get him on the roster. So Arizona said you can have him for a bag of peanuts despite the pew, pew, pew last year from Jonathan Gannon. So I just, when I took a step back.
You don't do sound effects a ton, so I love that.
That was pretty good, wasn't it? I was at a Phillies game last year. Someone told me I looked like Jonathan Gannon, so I feel like I have to, really, really go into it. So I'm just not sure they have the wide receiver firepower to do it. Now, you could argue Kyle Pitts is the wide receiver too, and I would kind of buy that, but I don't know if Pitts is like good enough to be an actual wide receiver. Like, where does he fit in, right? So all of that, then you have a first-time play caller on top of that, and a head coach who, Morris in his career, 21-38 record as a head coach. Different players, different personnel, different years of time in the NFL. But I just think there is more fragility than the market assumes. And so I have taken a step back and said, I still want my exposure, don't get me wrong, but I'm not auto-drafting Drake London at the 1-2 turn like I was, a month ago.
It is interesting when you think about where Pitts will be on the field, and maybe this little too deep of a dive. I am going to go to some Falcons training camp stuff, but
oh, boots on the ground.
They did. Yeah, I got to. Ross Dwelley, peanut butter Dwelley time, as Mike calls him, and Charlie Warner, 2 longtime 49ers tight ends, they signed. So you look at that system and the way they run things, which is a lot more 2 tight end sets or 21 personnel. I don't think they're going to do 21, but is Kyle Pitts just going to be a pure, like, he is the slot wide receiver? He's Dalton Kincaid. That's what I'm trying to figure out. It's like, who's the Dawson Knox for this team? Are they going to run more 12? We'll figure it out. I can't see it be a pure Rams system, though, like where you just copy and paste, say the same A lot more routes for Drake London, though, who's been way better with 3 wide receivers than 2, which usually it's the opposite. Like Stephon Diggs is better with 2 wide receivers because there's less competition, but we'll see with that with London. So it is funny. The first 2 teams we have on here, it's Falcons, then the Eagles, and then we just don't have to talk about anybody else, right?
Of course. Yeah, obviously.
So the Eagles, Kellen Moore has been a constant conversation. I have talked up Devonta Smith to the point where I think I might be going crazy. You know, when you think about a player for long enough, you're like, oh man, I love this player. This might be my guy. And then you start backtracking a little like, maybe I'm overthinking it, or maybe I'm going so far as to say like, I think this is what should happen as opposed to this is what they will do. So can Kellen Moore, one, help us forget the end of the season, which was atrocious, and then make this offense be less predictable? I mean, it was very, very, you knew what you're going to do, and defenses were daring Jalen Hurts to beat them with cover 4 looks, and he couldn't do it. Yeah,
it was a train wreck from a scheme system, philosophy, from a pace standpoint with Brian Johnson last year. Like, it just, every Eagles fan was like, man, we miss Shane Steichen. And of course, Shane Steichen goes and creates magic with a backup quarterback. Like, I'm ready to follow Shane Steichen into like a burning building at this point. Okay. I think he's just one of the best play callers in the league. So you lose that, and you saw a lot of the efficiency stuff fall off. What really hurt, they dropped in play action. Their pace fell off quite a bit. Their attempts for Hurts over the middle of the field with like the RPO system and stuff like that, give him the layup throws. They weren't doing that. Like, Hurts in the middle of the field between the numbers, his success rate fell from 70% to 50% year over year, 11.1 YPA 2 seasons ago. Last year, 8.1 YPA. So now you get a play caller in Kellen Moore, who, we talked about this with his offenses, CeeDee Lamb, motion in and out of the slot. Keenan Allen last year, motion in and out of the slot. The way that he works inside out, I think, is going to be one of those things that creates wonders for Hurts' efficiency and therefore A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. So we were already high on Philly, but digging into some of the pace numbers, some of the usage in terms of how he uses his guys in the slot relative to how bad it truly was last year, really makes you want to say, like, man, the Eagles feel like, to me right now, an absolute priority where you can get, it depends where you are in round 1, but we love Devonta Smith. And then Jalen Hurts all the time is falling to the 4th round. Like, that just feels wrong, doesn't it? For a guy that you and I both have ranked as our quarterback 1 for best ball ranking. So I don't want to be a homer, but I just want to be all the way in on Philly this year.
Yeah, Hurts right now is going 41st overall, and we have him ranked 30th and 31st. So, I mean, we're basically saying, like, take him. Josh Allen, if he falls, it's fine, but we're a little bit behind market on Josh Allen. We'll talk about the Bills in a second, but I just love where Jalen Hurts goes. It's very easy to create a stacking partner. And the way that our rankings go, it's like you don't really have to force it too much. Like, it just kind of happens around that if you're on that back half of the board. So I think Jalen Hurts is going to be, of the elite guys, like, I've been taking him more than Mahomes, and I like Mahomes this year. I haven't been taking as much Lamar, but I think Hurts is set up. And spoiler alert, like, you and I were looking at the MVP markets, and I love doing this with you where we both look at the markets and we don't say anything to each other. And I'm like, okay, am I seeing the same thing? And Betz and I saw Jalen Hurts as like, why is he valued the same as Aaron Rodgers? Like, that's insane to me. And then we also like Anthony Richardson's value. This is more value-based stuff at this point if you want to bet it. But I like Jalen Hurts a lot. Let's talk about some wide receivers, though, because there's some depth charts that people are trying to sort out. We've talked about the Patriots a little bit in their ambiguous room, and I figured out that his name is Jalen Polk. It is not Jalen Polk. I don't know why one day I decided to forget. So Dynasty Podcast, apparently that's what I forgot. But you called him a league winner, which I won't go far to say that. But
some are saying, Kyle, per source.
If he hits, Betz is a genius. If he doesn't hit, you go, he's a rookie. It happens.
He was a rookie. It was a cost thing. You just forget about that in 8 months.
Darnell Mooney, it was a cost thing. 3 wide receivers. He's going to be on the field a ton, and just, he got hurt. So let's talk about the Bills, because I think that's the one that needs sorting out, because I'm going to read the list of names. That is their wide receiver depth chart. And you can tell me, how much you love these guys. Keon Coleman, the rookie, Dirty Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, and then, man, these are the boys. MVS, Mac Hollins, KJ Hamler, who I forgot was still in the NFL, Andy Isabella, former Cardinals great, drafted ahead of DK Metcalf, and Chase Claypool. A bunch of dudes, not named Stephon Diggs, and not named Gabe Davis. So, how are you sorting this out?
Man, those last like 3 or 4 names, like rewind the clock 4 years ago, you're in a rookie draft in a dynasty league. You're like, oh, baby, here we go. Andy Isabella in the second round. This is going to be great. What a time. Yeah, this is the key, right? Like Josh Allen is still being drafted either in every draft, quarterback 1 or quarterback 2, right? So like the expectations are sky high. He's got one of the highest odds or shortest odds, I should say, to win MVP. They've got a massive team total. So like the Bills offense should be very, very good. The problem, of course, is that the offensive philosophy changed quite a bit last year when their OC changed to Joe Brady. We obviously have talked about the rush rate being a lot higher. Stephon Diggs' usage took a massive, massive hit. And it was just kind of this like target James Cook, Josh Allen, you're going to run a bunch and we'll sort of piece it together from there. And it worked and they won a ton of games. Joe Brady is back as the OC. So I think we can largely assume it's going to be about the same. And I think basically like, let's let Steph Diggs walk, let's let Gabe Davis walk, tells you a lot about how they view this team and how they're going to run. So I want to find Josh Allen's wide receiver 1 because I do think there is upside if it hits. The problem for me is that I don't know Keon Coleman's profile is deserving of the current ADP. I'm worried about Khalil Shakir. He played a ton in the slot last year. And the problem for me is if Khalil Shakir is going to play in the slot, but also Dalton Kincaid is going to play in the slot, but also Curtis Samuel is going to play in the slot, I just don't see how there's like a consistent 2 wide receiver set outside of Keon Coleman being on the field. So I find myself like kind of stuck of just, I don't know who to take here. And I keep coming back to the fact that these guys are all probably worth chasing. But like when we look back at the end of the year, I'm not going to be surprised if none of them are like awesome advanced rate players because I think the rush rate is going to be so high.
There is something off on this team. And I think I brought this stat up in a couple of different places, but like this is the first time ever that a quarterback 1 in ADP doesn't have a single wide receiver in the top 40. Now you can look at that in a couple different ways and say like, okay, well, one of these guys will emerge. Well, there is an opportunity where it's just nobody. And you've seen that before with like Lamar, where it's like the Ravens wide receivers have just kind of been mostly bleh, and you get a bunch of dudes who kind of end up sorting.
Comp, by the way.
Yeah, and obviously they're not the same type of player, but it just spread out so much. There's heavy usage from one tight end, and you have a running quarterback and a quarterback that runs in a ton inside the goal line. So it's kind of tough here. And to bring up Shakir, he's kind of a sexy name. He's going right now at wide receiver. 55! There's always opportunities to use that, man. It shows up way more than you would think. But
just naturally.
I know. With 3 wide receivers on the field, he led the team in yards per out run last year, which is awesome. Sounds amazing. And yards per target, I figured this out later, number 1 in the league. So sounds great. But with 2 wide receivers on the field, he only ran 5 routes all year. So you were kind of doing the exercise, and I think it's right. It's like Coleman's on the outside is the classic X receiver, big-bodied guy. I'm pretty sure Curtis Samuel is going to end up being the Z, where they move him around. Joe Brady did that with him in Carolina. And then he's going to have slot snaps, but it's going to be Kincaid in the slot, and it's going to be Dawson Knox, man. Like Dawson Knox is getting paid a ton this year and next year. And I think that's what they wanted to do last year. They wanted to do 12 personnel. He got hurt. They weren't that effective, and they had to move on. The weirdest thing is when you look at this team's splits, they were actually like pretty similar in like play success rate and a lot of like the metrics that are like, wow, this team didn't really change that much. The biggest difference is they just won. They were 6-1 down the stretch with Joe Brady. So I'm worried that this offense is going to fall flat. They've won the division 4 years in a row. I'm kind of betting against Buffalo. I like James Cook where he goes, and I like Kincaid, but I don't know if I've been taking anybody else.
Yeah, and I think the parallel you just made, again, not the same scheme, not the same system, not the same players, but just like last year, we all spent all offseason. It was like, who is the Ravens guy? Who is the one to get? Is it Odell? Is it Rashad Bateman? Like we did that exercise all offseason. And, obviously in hindsight, we know the answer was like none of those dudes at their ADP. Now, Zay Flowers had his moments and he was pretty good as a rookie. Mark Andrews got hurt, so that changed the equation. But similar, I feel the same way about that offense. We're like, okay, I took Josh Allen. Like, yeah, I'll throw a dart on Curtis Samuel. Yeah, I'll throw a dart on Khalil Shakir, whatever. But like, I'm not going to be surprised if we look back and we're like, at these ADPs, this was not what you needed.
Yes.
Is kind of my take home after doing this research. Now, I do want to watch in training camp, like, who is it in 2 wide receiver sets? Because I agree with you. I think they do want to play a lot of 12 with those tight ends. And to me, that's the key. Like, if Khalil Shakir is not in 2 wide receiver sets, I don't see how he has a ton of value in this offense. But it might be a rotation. They might, move guys around, like you said. So I'm just watching the Bills wide receiver room closely in camp. There's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, I mean, love Josh Allen. He breaks fantasy football. But keep in mind, Lamar Jackson won league MVP. He was a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And I would say, Zay was fine, but like none of those guys were great win rate players on the team last year, other than Gus Edwards, who was super cheap. So I like the rushing attack. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Satisfy your iced coffee craving without leaving home with custom blends. From double espressos to cold brew style. Meant to be iced, meant to be simple, and consistently delicious with a touch of a button. Visit Nespresso.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy. The robots have gotten pretty good at what they do, but they can't pour passion into what they make or give an item a human touch. On Etsy, you can find something handmade, handpicked, or designed by independent sellers who bring their whole hearts to their small shops. Shops that prove you can bring more joy to the lives of others when you do what you love. The fingerprints Etsy sellers leave behind reveal who they are. Human beings, determined to make human connections. So the next time you're shopping for yourself or someone special, choose extraordinary items, handmade, handpicked, or designed by small businesses. Keep commerce human. Discover small businesses on Etsy.
All right, let's talk about a couple more wide receiver rooms. The Chicago Bears are a team that are really, really tough, and I don't have a ton of exposure. I've had some Adunze when he's dropped recently, but like DJ Moore, sadly Keenan Allen, it's really hard to sort out these guys. So how do you see the targets being distributed? And then in best ball, are you taking any of these guys?
Yeah, this is a tough situation, right? Because when you look at each guy individually, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, you can make a case for all of them. DJ Moore was awesome last year. Keenan Allen showing zero signs of slowing down, even at this stage of his career. Rome Odunze was the 9th overall pick in the NFL draft. So it's like, in a vacuum, each guy looks awesome. The problem is that this is a rookie quarterback. And I know Caleb Williams is a generational talent, as people say. He's the best prospect that we've seen in quite a while, all those things. And I think he could hit. And if he does, then these guys are going to look pretty good. But the problem with a rookie quarterback is the touchdown rate generally isn't where you want it to be for fantasy. So I'm just trying to figure out which one of these guys loses out. And maybe it's a different conversation for redraft versus best ball because they can ping pong and there can be spike weeks for different players and that sort of thing. Of course, there could be injuries. But if all 3 of these guys stay healthy, you're asking so much from Caleb Williams to support all 3 of these guys who are all going as borderline top 36 fantasy wide receivers. So I don't know, man. We kind of have a blueprint of last year with Shane Waldron coming over, where last year DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN, right? Not the same players, not the same talent level, not even the same roles necessarily, but just you were asking a lot for all 3 of those guys to hit, and obviously they didn't. So I've been trying to pick and choose my spots here. With the Bears, I just think that we need to be mindful that, again, one of these ADPs is probably wrong unless Caleb Williams is literally like the dude, unless he's that good, which he could be, but you're asking a lot here.
I just looked at all 3 ballers' projections for this wide receiver room, and I think they feel comfortable with DJ Moore. Keenan Allen's really hard to move away from a median projection, right? It's just like, he's going to get targets. You're never going to give him more than like 5 or 6 touchdowns, just who he is. But then Odunze, they have buried, man. And outside their top 50, and this is season-long projections, he obviously could outperform. But at wide receiver 38 right now, I think that's the toughest one. I also am very, very tempted to go into these spreadsheets and just change something just for the heck of it, but I won't. just to see you people like have a smile on your face, like, oh wow, how is Rome Odunze just got 2 more touchdowns? But I think it's fair to have some skepticism of this player, where Keenan Allen just demands targets. He always has, and he will in this offense. Like, he's going to be open on 3rd down. So I think for the most part, I'm fine with Odunze if he has, 4 spike weeks. I'm fine with that at wide receiver 38. I just hate paying that 65th overall. Like I feel like I can replicate that somewhere else in my draft. So that's kind of my take.
Yeah, and the other thing with Waldron, even last year, it's like, well, you have your 2 studs, you've got Metcalf, you got Lockett. Oh, they drafted JSN in the first round. Like they're almost certainly going to be a team that lives in 11 personnel and 3 wide receivers. They weren't. They ran 11 personnel on first downs at just a 42% rate. On, last year, that was 23rd in the NFL. So I like to use first downs as what teams do with their personnel because I think it tells you what they actually want to do. Like if you use just the overall season numbers, if a team was trailing all game, they're going to be higher,
right,
of course. So on first downs, they were bottom 10 in the league in 11 personnel usage. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. So I'm a Waldron skeptic, personally, that this is going to work for all these guys to pay off ADP. I wish I could tell you which guy is going to be the loser. It's very tough to do. So I've got exposure to all 3. Like I've got some bear stacks. I'm not saying don't take them. I just think we need to think critically about that and really monitor training camp. How much 11 personnel are they actually going to use?
I've kind of ping-ponged about the Bears where, it's like, oh, I could see all these holes in Caleb Williams games. Like, oh, actually, like I could see how this works. And then, yeah, Waldron's kind of been the thing that I think you and then I know Jason's been skeptical too, of just like, how is this guy still getting a job? Like he's kind of living off of what Geno did a couple years ago. So yeah, I agree with you. I think overall the Bears are going to be a team where I've had the most Swift because he's fallen the most, and I think that he's going to be the clear guy. But yeah, another NFC North team I do want to bring up is the Packers, their wide receiver room, because you could convince me of any of these dudes. I mean, you could look at some Bo Melton stats and go, holy crap, this dude, when he was on the field that last little month, like they used him, and they used him like in a crazy way. Like he ran more routes with 2 wide receivers on the field than Jaden Reed did last year. Jaden Reed ran 2 routes. So if we're talking about Shakir, we probably need to talk about Reed, he's a Swiss Army knife. He's going to be fine. But I like Watson where he's going. I've come around to Watson. We talked him up on the Dynasty podcast. Dobbs is always fine. Dobbs is going to have a couple of spike weeks and catch some touchdowns. So what is your take on these dudes? And I didn't even mention Dontavian Wicks, who everybody loves.
Everybody loves Dontavian Wicks. Let's also not forget that they also hit on 2 rookie tight ends last year. Like Luke Musgrave can play, Tucker Kraft can play. Like the Packers just hit on every draft pick for their skill group over the last, 3 years. So that's annoying if you're not a Packers fan. But when I look at this room, if we're trying to figure out how things might go this year, it's tough to do, obviously. But from weeks 5 to 13, which are basically the non-injury affected Christian Watson games, he played 73% of the snaps in all those games. So he basically was a full-time player. Here's how the usage was distributed. So it was Romeo Doubs led the wide receiver room in routes. He saw a 15% target share. Watson right behind him at number 2 in routes, 19% target share. Jaden Reed, 3rd in routes at 63%, only a 15% target share. And then Dontavian Wicks, 34% routes, 10% target share. So, man, the Watson price is so intriguing, especially as an arbitrage play or a leverage play in best ball on Jaden Reed. And I love Jaden Reed's talent. I mean, dude's a baller. I think he's going to be very, very good for years. But like you said, the problem is I'm not sure he makes his way on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. I think the coaching staff very, very much trusts Romeo Doubs. As boring as that is, he has a role in this team and he's going to be on the field. So then I look at it, it's like, where is their value in this room? And sure, you could throw a dart on Wicks in the double-digit rounds. That's fine. But I do think Christian Watson ADP is already baking in the injury concerns that we have about him. And the usage last year says he is going to start in 2 wide receiver sets. And I've gotten some pushback on this, on Twitter and stuff, because people point to the playoff games. But the Packers historically are always very, very conservative with their injured players coming back, especially in the first week or 2, which is why you saw Christian Watson barely play in the playoffs. He was just coming back from the hamstring injury again. So I'm not using those numbers. I'm using when he was healthy. And I think reading the tea leaves here, depending on if anything changes in camp, but reading the tea leaves there, I think Watson is a pretty interesting target right now at his ADP.
Yep, 73rd overall, wide receiver 45. I think you and I both like on this site, in PPR, if you're playing on DraftKings, I think it's a little different conversation, but in just 2 years and limited time, like he has 12 touchdowns. He's been a dude that has these big spike weeks. So I like him a lot where he goes. I also think this is going to be a team that's so fractured in people's exposure. Like depending on you can double stack Jordan Love very easily. But also there's going to be people in your league that's like, oh, I love Jaden Reed. I'm just going to, do a one-off here. Or like me, like, hey, I'm not going to stack Jordan Love, but I've got Christian Watson as my wide receiver 4 or 5. Like, this team is going to be fracturing a lot of exposure. So I think when you look at the end of the year, you're going to have to guess the 2 of the 4 wide receivers that you get right, or, the wide receiver, and then if you get a tight end. And I'm just worried that at the end of the day, like, it's going to ping pong still. But Watson's the one that I think I want most at his ADP. You want to mention the Texans real quick, because I've been pretty much hands off on Diggs. Give me some Nico, give me some Tank. But are they moving Diggs in the slot? That's the big question I have.
I think most likely. That's what I'm looking for in camp is, we think Bobby Slowick's a pretty sharp guy. Obviously, is like PFF background, like analytically driven.
Love me some Bobby Slow.
He should.
Former colleague of mine.
Coworker, best friend. Yeah, obviously. We should see more 3 wide receiver sets, obviously. I mean, you don't trade for Steph Diggs and keep running 12 or 21 or whatever. So we should see three or more wide receivers. But just for context, last year, they were 21st in their rate of dropbacks with 3 wide receivers on the field and 25th in first downs. So their base set was not 3 wide receivers. So we definitely need that to change. We needed to see that in camp, or these ADPs are wild, of course. But when you look at Diggs in the slot, his slot rate last year, 36%, was much higher than Tank Dell, who was at 28.7, and Nico at just 20. So I think Diggs is going to be their slot wide receiver. The problem for me with that is that, credit to Jacob Gibbs on Twitter, over the last 2 years, when Diggs has run from the slot, his targets per route run is 24% compared to 28% when he's on the perimeter, 2.54 yards per route run on the perimeter compared to 1.68 from the slot over the last 2 years. You also factor that stuff in with, CJ Stroud. His goal is not to check it down. Among the league leaders in ADOT, he was consistently delivering the ball downfield to Nico and Tank. So if Diggs can't win down the field anymore, and I'm not necessarily the best film scout out there, but that's kind of what some are suggesting, and his ADOT will reflect that. I don't know that I have a ton of upside cases for Steph Diggs if Tank Dell stays healthy and if Nico stay healthy, obviously. But I've been kind of the same as you. I've been hands off Steph Diggs and really trying to get as much Nico and Tank as I can.
I'm pretty sure that they're going to evolve. And this is kind of like, if you are a Kyle Shanahan disciple, that you basically came from that tree, in year 1, you basically try to run the Shanahan system. And it can work for some, but it's like, they tried that for a while. They tried, a ton of 21 personnel. I don't have the number in front of me. It was like 35% of the time they had a fullback on the field, Andrew Beck, where it's like, this isn't Kyle Juszczyk. This isn't the same team. You don't have George Kittle. And so I think this year, they're going to lean more into the 3 wide receiver and just say, hey, CJ Stroud, you are a 6'3", 6'4" point guard. Just win this for us and just like get us down the field. Tank will be playing outside. I don't think people realize that he's small, and yet most of his stuff was outside. He wasn't getting stuff behind the line of scrimmage. Like, he's not Rondale Moore. He is very different, and he gets open. He's more of like the Odell Beckham, like, okay, you're on the outside, you're smaller, but you just get open. So Nico and Tank, I'm fine at ADP. Stroud has dropped a ton, which is fair. Have you been taking any Stroud right now? He is going as 67th overall, which is like almost 2 rounds later.
Yeah, I was pretty hands off early on just because I thought the price was crazy. But now that he's dropped, I've got a bunch of
you
Stroud double
were so
stacks.
ahead of the curve, man.
So ahead, dude. Are you kidding me? We saw this coming. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think he's at a perfect range now where, and you can push him too in drafts. Like, if you've got 2 of these guys, push it. Challenge your room. Sometimes he'll fall to the 70s, which is a really good value. So yeah, I've taken a bunch of Stroud, recently.
I hear your strategy, and maybe this is just knowing you over the years. Like, best ball and DFS is where you get to like be a bully. That's where you personally bets. I'm sure at school you weren't one of those kids that push people in the locker, but it sounds like you want to take my lunch money sometimes. You want to bully people in the lobby. Like, is this just like where you get to like vent some frustration?
Obviously. What's funny about the lockers is like you see that on movies and TV all the time. Like, I got shoved in a locker. Like, did that actually happen in your school? It never happened in our school.
Oh, side story here. They're 9th grade. We'll not forget about this. Chattahoochee High School. Shout out to the Cougars. I went there for 9th grade.
You got shoved in a locker?
No, not me. I watched a fight where somebody shoved somebody's face in the locker and shut the locker on his face.
Oh my goodness.
So when you said that, I was like, this is high school. This is what high school's like. They warned me in all the movies.
That didn't happen in our school. I mean, you guys just have a little edge down there in the South. My goodness.
Oh, man. Talk about growing up in the toughest part of Georgia. That's definitely me. You can definitely look up where I grew up. It was very, very tough. All right, next little conversation here. Let's talk about some running backs, because I think in training camp, you and I are going to figure out a lot of who's the RB2 for some teams. Like, we're not even going to talk about the Colts, but like, I don't know. Is it Trey Sermon? Is it Evan Hall? Does it even matter? Do we even care? But like, those are the kind of dart throws that people are making right now. And we would say, wait on that type of information until we get more. But the other teams, like we talked about the Bengals a lot. I cannot believe that you've talked about Zach Moss as much as you have on all of our podcasts. I'm offended.
Me either.
It's shocking.
It's terrifying.
I thought I knew you. So we're not going to talk about Zach Moss even more. Did you call him a league winner? I can't even remember. I deleted it from my brain.
You'll have to go back and listen to last week's episode. I can't reveal that information here.
Imagine talking to your past self, like 2022 bets, and you're saying, hey, by the way, Zach Moss is going to be a league winner in 2024.
This is going to look so silly in 3 months or 4 months. I'm like, can you imagine when I said that in early July? Like, what an idiot.
See, podcasting tip. And I know, I'm a little older than you, a little more experienced. Just get everything right, and you don't have to do that.
Obviously. Why? I haven't been doing that at all this time. I need to start doing that more.
That's actually my cheat code for next week. When we talk about best ball cheat codes, just pick the best possible teams, and you'll advance.
Pick the right guys.
All right, so let's talk about the Cardinals, because Trey Benson has been on our 0 RB targets. I'm still interested, but I'm starting to cool off a little bit, just knowing like, okay, I know James Conner, and this dude has a crazy workload, and he was awesome down the stretch. The last 5 weeks of the season, he was amazing. So how do you see this backfield being split up? And then in best ball, are they worth the investment?
Yeah, just for context on James Conner, over the last 3 years, he's coming off his best season yards per carry last year, his best missed tackles forced rate per attempt, his best yards per touch mark. So like James Conner, I know there's not when we want to bet on running backs historically, but he, in the numbers at least, showed that he's not slowing down. So for a while, I was like, older running back, like we've seen this, like I'm going to go with the younger rookie. But I do start to fear that there is an element of this that I think Jonathan Gannon just loves this dude. He was a team captain last year. They talked about him all the time after the games of like,
he's got that moxie.
He's got the moxie, lunch pail guy, comes to work, does the dirty work. But in all seriousness, I think it's going to take a lot for Trey Benson to overtake.
Comes to work, shows up for his job.
Clocks in on time, last one out. I feel like it's going to take a lot for Benson to overtake James Conner as like the starter. So I'm still taking some Trey Benson, obviously, because he kind of goes in the ambiguous range. And obviously, if James Conner gets injured, which he's done, then Trey Benson is going to be an awesome pick. So I still want him. But I was for a while just like completely fading James Conner and diving into the numbers. I think I want to be taking some James Conner, man. I just think he's been good. The team loves him. We think the team is going to be obviously a lot better this year with Kyler Murray fully healthy. And, Trey Benson, going back to some of his college profile stuff, he never was really used as a true bell cow. So again, I think it's going to take a lot to overcome James Conner. And outside of injury, I'm not sure it's going to happen. So I have started to mix in more James Conner recently, and I moved him up a little bit in my ranks to reflect that.
I think we forget with the Cardinals that when Kyler came back, this is a top 10 offense. If you want to look at EPA per play and lots of other stuff, they've added a wide receiver that we like, that the books say is going to be a 1,000-yard wide receiver. We love Trey McBride, who was, a king when it comes to lots of different stats, especially yards per route run. But with Conner, I think the hardest thing I go back and forth with is just like, I'm talking if I didn't know his age and I just said player, offense, I would love him. Like seeing the type of usage. I mean, he averaged 24 opportunities per game in the last 5 games. So like Drew Petzing, the offensive coordinator, the whole system actually is like, oh, I could see this be something. And they were running around with, I don't know, Greg Dortch or whoever. Little stray there for Greg Dortch. Sorry,
it's going to be tough when in 3 weeks, Kyle, Greg Dortch out there is filling your timeline on Twitter. No, he's not going to play in the preseason because he's with the starters. Is just dusting dudes on deep balls, and he's out there looking good in shorts, basically like Jameson Williams will. It's storage season, baby. It's storage season.
What was our bet again? Something like he's not in the league?
It was in 3 years if he's still on an NFL roster.
Okay.
And he will be.
I like those. Okay, cool. I just think that I am banking on a lot. I think I'm just assuming that Benson's going to overtake it. It's just kind of like, oh, he's going to be a second half kind of guy. James Conner always gets hurt. That's the narrative I have at play. But like, does Benson get 10 touches in week 1?
Probably not.
Okay. I kind of see it like where that's kind of where he ends up is like 10 to 12 touches, over after the first month. And then he gets into that kind of role where it's like they're going to use both guys. But I have a hard time because I like stacking Kyler a lot. So are you stacking him with James Conner at all?
Not actively, but I think it's totally possible. I mean, we talked about that this past summer of just the data has shown when you just bet on offenses, period, tackle on the running back, generally it's just you're making the bet the offense is great. So I think it's totally fine. Obviously, my priority is Marvin McBride, but if I have a running back sitting there, then I'll take both of these guys. I think the biggest take home for me, like I said, was just I had the same mindset of you going into draft season where it's like old guy, probably on the decline, probably not the same as he was. Like they took a rookie. The problem is the rookies still have to perform, right? And people that faded Travis Etienne last year found out the hard way that that's still the case, and myself included. I took a ton of Tank Bigsby last year. And I just want to open my mind to say, like, sometimes these veterans are just good, and they keep the job. So I think I want more James Conner than I have right now.
I don't know if you saw, speaking of somebody else in this backfield, did you see what they did with Michael Carter?
Oh, they gave him more money, didn't they?
They gave him like a $2 million like raise, and I saw the blurb. It was like, because of a great season, he did have a bunch of big runs at the end of the year. Like he had as many 15-plus yard runs as Jonathan Taylor.
Stop. So, is that real?
Yeah, let me see if I get the stat. I was telling Andy the other day. I mean, those are the best kind of stats, right? Like where you just
cherry pick it.
Yeah, oh yeah, of course. That's the best part. I'll find it later. I didn't make it up, right?
That's if it's on the internet, it can't be false. It's got to be true.
Oh man, I'll look it up later. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. You would think that I would have found that in that time, but I definitely did not find that stat at all in that short little break. I will find it though. Let's talk about the Rams. How do you see Blake Corum eating into Kyren Williams' workload? Because I have to say, slowly but surely, I've been off Kyren to the point of like, I can't take him. And I have been taking him, especially when he was like a fringe first round pick with a big board. And then slowly it's kind of like, okay, second round. Okay, now he's a third round. So how do you see Kyren?
Yeah, I've been the same as you where it's like, man, I know he just had an incredible season, but there's reasons that you would say like he's maybe not worth that first, fringe first round pick. Maybe he's not worth that fringe second round pick. But now he frequently goes in the middle to back of the third round. And I think I'm back in, man. I think the risk is baked into the ADP for how good he was, for how good the offense was when Kyren and Matthew Stafford were both healthy last year playing together. This is a top 5 team in EPA per play. So you get Puka in year 2, you get Kupp potentially fully healthy and kind of a bounce back. You get Kyren here, who a lot of the concern was, they took Blake Corum. Oh, Blake Corum was such a good touchdown scorer at Michigan. We spent a lot of time, right, this offseason talking about Blake Corum's profile, and like, it wasn't that good. Like, he found the end zone a ton, but like, his efficiency stuff was not great. Kyren is trusted by the staff. His numbers were good, like not just like a volume play, which he was. Don't get me wrong, he played a ton of snaps, but he was good on efficiency standpoint. Among 49 backs that had 90 plus carries last year, he was 5th in yards per carry, 9th in yards after contact per attempt, 7th in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. He was very, very good. So again, similar to Etienne, kind of Tank Bigsby comparison last year, like I think Kyren's going to have to play poorly for Blake Corum to overtake him or really eat into his role. So is he going to get 23 opportunities per game? Maybe not. Is he going to get 18 or 19? I think probably. And this is an offense I want to buy into. So I've come around to Kyren in round 3. I think I've been just kind of on autopilot where it's like wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, and then I'll figure out the running backs. Kyren has upside to chase at this price.
Yeah, I'm fine. 29th overall, RB8. if you want to do hero RB builds, I'm fine with him there. And just to give you another stat, when he returned in week 12, this team averaged 31 points per game. So I think my philosophy has kind of been, if I'm buying into Kyren, I'm buying into the team as a whole. But I've also been taking the other approach where it's like, hey, I haven't been taking Kyren, and therefore I just haven't been taking Rams at all. Like, I don't want little pieces of the Rams. I've been saying, like, okay, if this team really hits, they hit in a really big way, and this is a machine. He also was very, very touchdown dependent last year, which we like for best ball, but 37% of his points came via touchdown. Going back to 2018, if you're above 35%, all of them except for one drop the next year, and they usually dropped about 5 points per game. So I think I'm just expecting a drop in points, but in builds where I say he hits, the Rams hit, then I want to go all in on this offense, and you kind of can now. Before you couldn't. You kind of had to pick between Kyren and Puka. Now you're at the point where it's like, you want to take Puka, then you can get Kyren, and then you can come back with Stafford later. Like, I'm totally fine with that.
Yep, makes a lot of sense.
All right, let's keep going. Have you figured out the Dallas Cowboys RB1? Or does anybody know?
Nobody knows, not even the Cowboys. But I think the take home here is we should be chasing both of them. Meaning, if we nail the right guy, the guy that gets the goal line roll, there is double-digit touchdown upside in this offense. Obviously, they were incredible last year. They're in the red zone a ton. They live inside the 10-yard line a ton. And I think a lot of what we saw last year with our conversations was they talked a lot about resting their defense and they're going to establish it. And you, me, Mike, everybody, we were like, I don't know, man. They don't have the personnel to do that. They've got Dak and CeeDee. Maybe they just throw it a ton. And they did. And I think they're going to do the exact same thing here. So I was digging into Rico Dowdle a little bit more because I was kind of writing him off just because
Dowdle dig, as they say.
He has 113 career touches to this point. So not a ton of confidence that this is the guy that you want to bet on as a 26-year-old, player, which he'll be this year. Historically, that has not worked, but he was actually pretty good as a pass catcher from his efficiency stuff. So thinking about how they're going to throw and all that, I think there's a chance Rico Dowdle could be useful. He also looked, I think, better than a lot of people remember last year, just kind of watching some of his games. So I have accepted both possibilities of like Zeke could just literally fall in the end zone a bunch, and that's what you need in best ball. Or Rico Dowdle overtakes him because Zeke has declined every single year. I see both paths, so I have been trying to get a little bit of each guy, especially as part of Dallas stacks, because right now it's like CeeDee, Dak falls forever, and then no one really wants Cowboys outside of maybe Jake Ferguson, right? So you can build a pretty good value stack here, and obviously it's an offense we want.
I'm fine with the price. I'm fine with the touchdown equity, and it can't be as bad as what Pollard was last year on his 5-zone carries. So I'm fine with that. I do have a queue up right now where I'm going to look up how many running backs with, what'd you say, 90?
He had 113 career touches so far, Rico Dowdle.
Okay. Based on that, if you've been in the league this long, is there any chance that you ever, it's just like, I know Mostert took a while to get going, but anyway, I'll figure that out in a little bit. Next team I want to talk about is the Broncos, because I could make the case for a couple different dudes in the backfield. I can make the case for a couple different dudes at wide receiver. I could also make the case for a couple different dudes at tight end. Is this a team that I just want to stay away from because it could be spread out and it could be really, really bad? Just to give you like a frame of reference, there are teams last year like the Patriots and the Jets that ran like under 15 rushing plays inside the red zone, inside the 10 zone. It was like there's no scoring opportunities for anybody. So you could say who was the best player. And other than Breece Hall for the Jets, everybody else stunk. And for the Broncos, you had some Sutton weeks and everybody else stunk. What are you going to do? So I'm asking you, does it even matter?
Yeah, there's so many storylines with this team, right? Like, how is Bo Nix looking in camp? Who's actually a starting wide receiver? Because they've got, Sutton and the boys. Who's the starting tight end, right? We thought it was Dulcich. Maybe it's Lucas Kroll. No one knows. But to me, the key is the backfield. And it's because just Sean Payton's backfields historically had been a printing press for fantasy usage. Last year, Javonte Williams was wildly inefficient, which we talked about a lot coming off the ACL. We expected that. But he still had 275 total opportunities. Like, Sean Payton watching the games saw this dude be inefficient, and he kept being like, let's get Javonte the ball. So they're going to use the running backs a ton. Jaleel McLaughlin's getting a lot of steam. Audric Estime is, a day 3 rookie. I think he's fine from a talent level standpoint. Blake Watson's a UDFA who's getting a little bit of buzz. I just want to watch the running back touches in camp to figure out where to go from here. I like Jaleel McLaughlin. I really do. He's a good change of pace back, was one of the most efficient runners and pass catchers, so he's going to have a role, I think. The problem is he's 5'7", 187, and historically, that obviously caps your upside for fantasy, and there's kind of this like lingering just stink around Javonte Williams, right? Isn't there? But we knew last year would be a down year. We saw a down year, and now everybody's like, I don't know about Javonte Williams. I think Javonte is still going to get RB1 workloads here. And given the price where he goes, how much Sean Payton uses the running backs, how much Bo Nix is willing to check it down, I think he's a pretty good pick right now. So I've been taking more Javonte. I'm still taking some Jaleel. And I just want to monitor basically in camp, like, where are the touches going? Because there's so much to go around here with Sean Payton.
Yeah, McLaughlin's been fun. I think at the end of the day that I players that are undrafted that we fall in love with because they were undrafted a year later often are players that just like, oh, that was a fun run, and then it's just not worth it. So I just think it's a team that I'm just not investing in at all. And maybe I'm wrong about Bo Nix, maybe I'm wrong about this whole experience, but I am not excited about it. I did do the Q bets while you were talking.
Oh, hit me.
And I found out something really fun here. If you look at players to their first 4 years in the league, okay, so they've done 4 years like Rico Dowdle, and they've touched the ball 113 or fewer times, and you look at running backs or fullbacks.
This is going to be bad.
They're the player with the most PPR points. This is the best thing I've ever found in my life. Players with the most PPR points that are classified as a running back or fullback through the first 4 years, and they've had 113 fewer touches. You ready for this? Anthony Ferkser, the Ferk Daddy.
Yeah, baby. We are so back.
I guess they classified him as a fullback, but no, there's nobody's. There's literally no one since 2000.
Okay. Well, that's not good. What a revelation on the show, by the way.
At this point, Rico Dowdle's very, very not in play for the most part, historically speaking. Let's talk about the Saints.
Come on,
we talked a little bit on the Dynasty podcast where I was trying to sort this out because there's been talk about Jamal Williams. We've loved Kendry Miller because that's what I think we said should happen. Now, they might trust Jamal Williams in pass protection. He's going to be on the field a lot more. So who is the RB2? Do we know anything right now?
I don't think so. I think this is going to be a huge, huge piece of training camp right now. Is just Jamal Williams versus Kendry Miller, because Kendry Miller is drafted in 100% of drafts, and he's going pretty high, like around 140, right? Like he's kind of been climbing up boards week over week over week. And I feel like this is a situation where I know that from a process standpoint, from a bet against Jamal Williams standpoint, this makes a ton of sense. And I have taken a lot of Kendry Miller, so I hope he is the guy. But just recently, there hasn't been any positive news or positive buzz on Kendry. And so I just want to make sure that we're not chasing something that's going to be a zero. Similar to like Rashad Penny last year, right? Like, could you get that situation out of this backfield? I think you could, if he doesn't earn the trust of the coaching staff. And the other thing with this, I was digging into the offensive line more, man. And oh my goodness, it is so bad. So I know that we're excited about the pre-snap motion with Kubiak and the scheme change and all that sort of stuff. PFF has this as the worst offensive line entering the league, or entering the year rather. And we saw Alvin Kamara really struggle as a runner. So I think there's upside if Kamara continues to decline, but also if someone does get the RB2 job and does have either contingent value or timeshare value, is the running game actually going to be any good? Because the offensive line is a complete train wreck. So I have cooled on Kendrick quite a bit. I moved him down the ranks just to make sure that we're not too aggressive on targeting him. And I'm not saying I want Jamal Williams. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that I feel like we could get misled here on the Miller situation. I just want to monitor camp to see if he actually wins the RB2 job.
It's tough. Like I said, I think this is what should happen. It seems like if you just look at week 18, that's what they wanted to happen. And yet there's still things over the offseason that we still have to figure out. Maybe Clint Kubiak has a different way, a different system. San Francisco schemes are always weird. So he comes from there where it's like, hey, we think Trey Sermon's the running back in San Francisco. Nope, they don't like him at all, and they're just moving on. Like this is the same kind of situation. So, quick thought though. I've been taking Olave, I've been taking Shaheed. Are you still like guns up for Shaheed?
He's getting pricey. Like,
yes,
he's almost a top 100
the hardest
player.
Part.
And he doesn't feel like he should be. So I have cooled on him quite a bit. Like, not a lot of news has come out, or not much has changed from the team, obviously, at this point in the offseason. It's just that people are kind of catching on to him. So I've cooled off. My ranking really hasn't changed a ton. I loved him where he went. I have taken him less recently just because he goes pretty high.
Yeah. Now, I think he's a fun player, especially, he's getting talked up a bunch because of the kickoff stuff. And your boy right here took him in Scott Fishbowl.
Of course he did.
Watch out.
What round?
7th.
Okay, that's kind of where he went in mine. I think it was late 6th.
He went 12th overall in the draft.
What? That is wild.
It's crazy stuff. Let's kick this into high gear.
It's time for Rapid Round.
One of my favorite drops that we have, if you are a Join the Foot member, then you get to be a part of that on the Footcast. But a couple of quick hitters here, Rapid Round bets. Chargers depth chart. What does it look like? Is it Gus Bus?
I think it's Gus Bus, man. As boring as that is, I think he's the RB1. We just had a report, a prediction as far as entering training camp.
Daniel Popper,
yeah, really good writer for The Athletic, what he thinks the depth chart's going to look like. No questions asked. He said Gus Edwards is RB1. So it's a boring pick. It's not a fun click, but if he falls in the end zone a bunch like he did last year, he could be totally fine for best ball, especially for your advance rate. So Gus Bus looks like the target right now. Can we get any news on Kamani Vidal in training camp? That is what I'm trying to figure out.
I'd love to get that. I'm showing you a roster of a Best Ball Mania team that I have, where I have McCaffrey, Etienne, Gus Bus is my RB3, and Marshawn Lloyd. Would you be okay with just 4 running backs here, asking for a friend?
I think so.
Okay, that's how I feel. And the reason I brought that up is I think Gus Bus is a valuable RB3 on a site that cares about touchdowns. All right, next one, Commanders. Does Austin Eckler have anything left in the tank? Have you been taking him at all? Is he even alive?
So Eckler's an interesting case, right? Because people will say in week 1, he was awesome. And then he had the high ankle sprain and he came back and he was terrible. And I've done some research on this type of stuff. It does take quite a while for guys to recover their form from a high ankle sprain, even when they're back on the field for 3, 4, 5 weeks. So I think there is a world where Eckler has some juice left. The problem for me is that even if he does, we need to make sure he wins the goal line role. And I'm not sure he will. Brian Robinson obviously is there. We know Cliff Kingsbury wants to run when they're getting close. Historically, they've been among the league leaders in rush attempts inside the red zone. So I'm monitoring that in training camp, like who gets goal line work, because that is a key in this Cliff system. The other issue for Austin Eckler is we have not just like a very good scrambling quarterback, potentially an elite scrambling quarterback in Jane Daniels, who is not going to check it down. So I find it tough to see the path for Eckler behind this offensive line where he really bounces back in a major way. So I'm behind consensus on rankings right now. I dropped him a little bit.
The Ravens, we've kind of talked about them. We talked about Derrick Henry. He could totally bury us. So last week, that was our quick question. The Lions, a team that I talked about before, is like, I want to stack the Lions. The biggest question still is Jameson Williams ready to be a full-time player? So even if the answer is yes, does that help us in where he's going?
So people know my stance in general, but I did want to get some more data behind this. And you talked about the Jared Goff situation. And it's like, if Jameson Williams is going to be a full-time player, he's probably not taking targets away from Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the best target earners in the league, Sam Laporta, who was great last year, Jahmyr Gibbs, who was above 20% targets throughout run. As a rookie, we expect that to jump in year 2. So he has to hit on deep balls, right? Like I think that's kind of the only case for me. I see it working at this ADP is that he has to hit on big plays. Since Jared Goff has come to Detroit, his percentage of attempts that have gone 20 plus yards down the field, 9.1, 9.4, 7.8. Among qualified quarterbacks, that would have ranked 30th, 29th, 38th this past year. That was dead last. It's such a thin bet, man, for a guy that has to hit on big plays and win down the field. Can he do it? Of course. But you have a wonderful stat out right now about round 1 wide receivers that don't have a 14-plus fantasy point game through 2 years in the regular season. The list: Kevin White, Nelson Aguilar, Philip Dorsett, Laquan Treadwell, John Ross, Jameson Williams. That is a terrifying list to be on. So as he gets steamed up, I just find myself more and more on the other side of it.
Yeah, the The problem is just scheme for me. It's a problem of how this team likes to function. Teams blitz Jared Goff. There's so many things with Jared Goff you could look at where you go, he's bad against the blitz, but he actually led the league in passing yards against the blitz. But if you look it up, he also had the most attempts for it, but then he also had the most interceptions against it, and his completion percentage was worse than Zach Wilson. It's like he just had a lot of opportunities, and when he's blitzed, he's throwing it to Amon-Ra or throwing it to Laporta, which, by the way, have you started watching Receiver yet?
I got through about half of the first episode.
Okay, I watched the first episode. I'm excited to watch the next one. Amon-Ra, it's got the dog and a half. Like, he's just like, he's so serious. Like he's so serious at dinner. It's like, dude, come on, just have fun. And
we're reliving the, all the names that went ahead of him in the draft. We're doing that thing again?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Oh, he does it again. It's the same bit. I guess it's so different when you watch Kittle, who's like the goofiest person on the planet.
Yeah.
Feels like a cartoon character, and then you have Amon-Ra right afterwards. Okay, 2 more quick hitters. The Bucs. What does it mean for Chris Godwin in the slot? Do we care?
It's interesting. Godwin's been a guy that's declined in fantasy production the last couple of years. Obviously, one of those years, kind of the Bucs fell off with Brady. The other year, he was coming off the torn ACL, so perhaps you could have predicted it. But he played a ton, actually. His set a career high in rate at which he played on the perimeter last year outside of his rookie year. So naturally, it's not where he's played as an NFL player for the most part. And last year, he was top 20 in yards per route run from the slot. So I'm leaving the light on that Chris Godwin can bounce back this year, especially if he catches the right side of touchdown variance. He's been underperforming in the touchdown department. That can be fluky. Now, when you play across from Mike Evans, like Mike Evans is just a touchdown dude. So maybe he doesn't bounce back, but he's underperformed relative to expectation 2 years in a row. And I think there's a chance that if the volume stays the same, his efficiency goes up. He's had 1,000+ yards in 3 straight years. Like, he could absolutely get you 6 touchdowns, which is not winning your league, but at this price, I think is probably worth a click. So I've actually been pretty intrigued by Godwin after doing some of this research.
All right, finish it out with this last one. The Vikings. When do you think J.J. McCarthy will take over? I'm going to set the line at, well, what's the bye? Is it 6.5?
Week 6 is the bye.
Okay. So if they're not going to, I'm going to set it at, week 6 right after that. Dang it, I was going to get a better line, but
it's such a perfect.
Is that the assumption?
I think that's the assumption. And, for best ball, it's like kind of concerning if you're drafting a quarterback and you're like, I don't even know how many games this guy's going to start. But then I look and it's like, it's Sam Darnold, right? I mean, sure, he could outperform expectations. This scheme is very friendly. You've got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison.
He's outperformed his whole life. Look at Sam.
I get it. But also, this is a first-round draft pick. I think he's going to play more than people think. And so I've actually taken a decent amount of J.J. McCarthy. I'm ahead of consensus on him, just in that I think he starts more games than we think. I also think it's pretty easy to see a scenario where he steps into the system and throws for close to 300 yards and a couple touchdowns like Nick Mullins was doing last year, right? So I think it's a good time to get some JJ exposure at a cheap price. And it might fall even more, honestly, if we get news and reports out of camp that Darnold's going to start week 1. Like, I think you're probably going to get that. So I'm not scared off by that. I think JJ McCarthy is a really interesting round 18 pick.
You heard it here, folks. Betz is not scared of Sam Darnold.
Sam Darnold's going to start the entire season and win comeback player of the year, isn't he?
I got to look it up. It's worth throwing a little sprinkle on, man. He just lets him cook, lets him go.
That's the way it goes.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for the show. Once again, next week, we have a special episode. We'll be talking best ball cheat codes. We've got some great people. Betz, tell everyone goodbye.
Yeah, man. Big time article on the site. Check it out if you want more of what we talked about today. But I'm excited for next week's show. It's going to be great. Lots of guests around the industry, so make sure you are subscribed where you listen, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at thefantasyfootballers.com.